The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to our program. I'm Ben Ball, and good to have you with us here today, here on Faith Matters, and joined with Reverend Robert Cornegy and Bishop Doc Loomis. And good day, gentlemen.
Let's make America great again.
Good morning.
I brought the cheese. Let's, as we get into some articles for today, this is our first one in post-inauguration, so there will be some discussion about that, I imagine. So, but let's start out with one that actually is a pre-inauguration article. It came from Religion News Service, and by David Gushee. He writes in Christian Conflict and Change is the column, is the section from RNS, which is religionnews.com, on being strangers in a strange land. And he writes, I'm just going to read the first part and then a paragraph a little bit later on. It says, in my experience, there are three main kinds of American Christian attitudes when it comes to our national politics. There are those who feel quite comfortable with a Democratic president and during those times generally feel little tension between their Christian commitment and their direction and the direction of their country. There are those who feel quite comfortable with a Republican president, and during those times feel generally little tension between their Christian commitment and the direction of their country. And there are those who feel quite comfortable with no president, and at all times feel high tension between their Christian commitment and the direction of their country. He says he is moved from the first group to the third group as they prepare to inaugurate President Donald J. Trump as the 45th president. He goes on to talk about it a little bit more. I mean, he obviously was no fan of the now President Trump in any way, shape, or form. However, what do you think about those characterizations of those positions? First of all, Robert, what do you think?
Well, he does admit that he, this particular person talking about the Trump, he said that I have temporarily taken leave of my senses. So I thought that was pretty.
Maybe telling,
self-revealing, right there. Yeah, look, that's a clever way of throwing that third one in, which obviously he prefers the first. So when they're not in power, when the Democrats are not in power, and I think that's one of the things that we're seeing in this, with all the tantrums that we were just talking about earlier, that are going on around the country, that there is and particularly on social media, that there seems to be this sense that, kind of Democrats are destined to lead the country. And so they are the ones who should be in power, and that the Republicans are the kind of loyal opposition. And so they're the ones that are on the offense, and we're the ones that or the conservatives are the ones that are on the defense. And so it's Jay Sekulow said it yesterday. He said, obviously, folks, this has switched. He said, the conservatives are now on the offense, and it's the others that are on the defense. And it's like the world's turned upside down. They don't know how to handle that. Their worldview doesn't allow for that.
But we have talked a lot, Doc, in this program about tension, that it's a good thing to have tension between our Christian believers and our government.
Well, sure, it's a good thing. These are echoes of when Mark Woods was on the show. I mean, he would always talk about this. The tension is a sign that the church is alive and all that stuff. And most of us, look, I don't like tension in life. I really don't. I'd much rather live without it. I don't want to fight with my kids. I don't want to fight with you. But tension can be a good thing. In this particular case, it's a real good thing because it reminds us that, what did C.S. Lewis said? He said, we're living in a land that is occupied by the enemy. We live in an enemy-occupied territory, and we truly do. And it's that kind of that tension that we feel that reminds us that actually the people that are ruling this world are not the same as the people who are ruling the universe. That God is actually in charge of the universe, but has given over this world to others who rule it. And there should be a tension. Tension should tell me that I should not fall in line with the people who are the rulers of this earth right now, right? I think that's where Lewis was going with that.
Well, go ahead. I was going to say that I think this writer, David Gushee, though, I think one of the things that is kind of encouraging here is from a liberal, progressive Christian viewpoint, he is seeing this as being maybe that was not the right viewpoint to have as a Christian, that he should be in tension. That it should be. As he writes later, says, perhaps Christian proximity to political power for 2 millennia has tempted us to forget that the rulers of this world are indeed the rulers of this world, that they are not our friends, that they are not to be trusted, and that no earthly nation, political party, or leader is ever to be believed in. Jews who have spent most of their history as aliens and exiles have much to teach us here. So I think that's a fairly enlightened view.
Well, it is fascinating because Paul goes into it in depth about how we were once of this world. And now we're no longer of this world. We're just in this world, and we're actually representing another kingdom. There's the worldly kingdom, the earthly kingdom, the fallen kingdom, and then there's this other kingdom that we are ambassadors of. And so if we get too entangled in the earthly kingdom, then we start having problems, and that's for whether you're liberal or conservative or not. We just have to be so wise about that's the wisdom of God saying, just recognize we're different. We are different, and we are to a degree. The old that's a Vonnegut title, isn't it? Strangers in a Strange Land. Or was that
no?
Who was that?
But his line though is, "I have come unstuck in time." That may be a better line. But the here instead, I think we spoke some months ago, really right after the nominations were secure or are evident between the two parties, that we would have an amoral presidency. That this would not be one with either party where we would look to it for our moral guidance. We might hope that it would align in some way, but we wouldn't look to that. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's probably our correct view of that and still maintaining that. What do you think, Doc?
I think our goal as Christian people is to pray that the Lord will use whomever is in power to carry out his will. And sometimes it's funny. Sometimes he puts people in places that seem unlikely or unusable. And I'm thinking World War II I'm thinking about Winston Churchill. And yet he was exactly the right man for the job. It may be that Donald Trump is kind of a Churchill in that regard, that the Lord actually has a man that he can use right now. I received this amazing, I don't receive a lot of emails about prophecy, but I received this wonderful prophecy from 2007 that Donald Trump was going to be the president, and that what was actually going to happen was the Lord was going to begin to change him even while he was in office and begin to use him. Well, look, even if I have that hope that the Lord, if I pray in that direction, and if it's the Lord's will, then he might do that. But the thing about being strangers in a strange land is that it reminds me of England during the exile of Richard. I mean, when he came back, the people were really excited. See, he's been in exile from this land. Right. And then what happened is actually he came back, and the world didn't recognize him as the king. And I think this is Lewis also, who said our primary work is to be saboteurs, like the French resistance. Our job is to go around and go, look at this, the king is here. The king is here, and raise up a groundswell for the king as he begins his work of redeeming and taking over the world. I've always loved that.
And you did have President Trump in a couple of his first comments to his staff. He said, with God's help, you will do the work of the people. Again, we pray that would go. This liberal writer then concludes his article by saying, I will pray, as instructed in my faith, that the new leader will rule with justice and wisdom. I will pray for the well-being of my neighbors in the world. But I will fear and trust and obey God alone.
Well, if you're a Christian person and you prayed that Donald Trump would be president or that God's will would be done in the election, and if Donald Trump became president, then he doesn't stop there. That's not the way he works. He doesn't go, well, I answered that prayer. I got him
Thanks.
Trump, so now Trump can do whatever he wants.
I'm busy.
If this is his will and if this is what he's doing, then Trump is there for a reason, and he's going to carry that all the way through. It's not just let's get him in the White House. It's all right. Now, if this man can be molded and if he'll be obedient and if he'll follow, I'll keep working with him.
Yeah. And just go back to that thing about is this the morality of all of this? And this is somewhat what he brings up, that he was comfortable with the morality of the Democrat Party.
And that was a wrong
Yeah.
thinking.
And now, and of course, he's scared to death of the morality of the Republican Party. And so it really, and so he would prefer this fantasy that you can be amoral, with no morality. You're either going to have good morality or you're going to have bad morality. You can't be neutral in morality. And so, I think we're seeing this as, this whole idea that there's something wrong with legislating morality. Well, we always legislate morality. The question is, whose morality is getting legislated? So I think what we're going to see, that the thing that struck me, two things struck me about the inauguration. The first was that it was probably the most prayer-centric inauguration that I've witnessed. And the second one we'll talk about in the next segment.
All right.
I'm excited.
So Robert's going to lead us off. When we come back here in just a moment, here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240, and you're listening to Faith Matters. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Robert Cornegy. And Robert, you had left us with a point to make.
Well, the first thing was about the amount of prayer and references to God. There's always a veneer on these things,
Sure,
of religious stuff, vocabulary. But this was pretty intense, and there was a consistency to the prayers. But the second part of it was the content of his message, and we were talking about it earlier, and Doc made a great point in that it is remarkable how, and you did too, Ben, how the message was to the people, not to the politicians. He really isn't a politician. I mean, he is held to that thing all the way through, that his it's a new day coming. It's not, they've been having a party up here in this city for the long time, and that's coming to an end. And he was talking to the voters in an incredible way. Now, how successful he's going to be at that, we'll see. But he started off pretty powerfully, being consistent with what his campaign promises were. So we'll see. But then again, when Obama came in, he did the same thing.
Yeah.
He just went, it was a foot race, to try to get all these things done. So we'll see.
Sure, why you still had the majority.
You got that little 100 days thing,
Right.
Going, that first 100 days. So
well, you also have, I kept getting the impression that he was like the disciple who went into a town and was rejected by that town and kicked the dust off his shoes and moved on. I mean, that he was looking forward to the people and not behind him, to those Republican and Democrat who were behind him, who were not. He said, he kept saying, "I'm going to return it to you." He did not look back on that crowd and acknowledge them for anything that they had done on a positive nature. Nothing. So he said, no, it's time to turn a new page. Now, back on the idea of that tension between us, I think this puts us in that position where we were relegated to the shadows as Christians before, but at least now we can both agree with him and disagree with him.
Correct.
When we're with him. I think there's that opening.
well, we just have to remember who the Messiah is.
As long as we remember that.
As long
yes.
as we remember who our Messiah is Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach. It's not Trump.
Yeah.
It's not Obama. It's not government. It's not that. It's not anything of this world. It's from another kingdom, and we are representatives of that other kingdom. So that's all I got to say about that.
Meanwhile, a couple of hundred or several 100,000 of this kingdom marched the next day in Washington, D.C., and it was called I'm not sure it actually had a name for the march. It was just called the Women's March, but it was in D.C. and then also included in a number of other towns and other communities, including Raleigh and Chicago and towns all over the country, was this march. And so now out of a website that is called Church Militant, it really is an Orthodox Catholic site, as far as I understand. It calls D.C. Women's March was never about inclusiveness. If anyone had questions about the true goal of the Women's March on Washington, D.C., those questions should have been laid to rest with the steady stream of vulgarities and pro-abortion, pro-gay rhetoric by speaker after speaker. These women were never about being inclusive and representing all female points of view. And we've heard the stories about Ashley Judd and Madonna and the things that they're saying in this march, and then this week, as we are talking here, there's another march coming up, the March for Life in D.C. as well, getting almost no publicity about
They
that.
never cover it.
Yeah.
They just never cover it, the major media outlets.
So did this march in D.C. and many other places? I mean, there was obviously hundreds of thousands, even millions that were taking part in this. Did it say anything to you? Did it accomplish anything? Doc, what do you think?
I have a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old grandchild living with me right now, and I've seen tantrums, and this is one of them. This is what this is. Look, here's what's happening. You have a group of people who've put we just got done talking about who we put our faith in. We have a group of people that have put their faith in people, leaders, programs, powers, all this kind of stuff. And so when their people don't get elected, they have nowhere to turn. There's no hope. They're left without anything, and so they pitch a fit. I'm just being honest. I have really dear friends that went to this march and put on the pink hats and all that stuff. Mm-hmm. But to be real honest with you, the ones that I know 2 people that went, and they both came back and said, "What was that?" They thought they were going to march for women's rights,
right, equality,
whatever that might be, and they were like, the sisterhood and all that thing.
Though.
But then they came back and they were like one took their kids, and she was like, "My gosh, people were swearing and dropping the F-bomb and all this." She said, "It was a horrible place to have my children. I would never do that again." But when you put your faith in men and then men don't win or they let you down, the only thing you have left to do is pitch a tantrum. Facebook is covered with all this stuff. Remember the big riots in Washington after Obama won the election? No, because Republicans don't do that. Conservatives don't do that. Why? Because if I'm a conservative Christian and Obama gets elected, you know what I think? God's got this. Mm-hmm. See, I have an out. I have another way to look at it.
Correct.
My mind can flip very easily and say, it's okay. In the scheme of things, it's okay. God has me. God has my country right now.
He's still on his throne.
He's still on his throne. But if you have rebuked God, if you don't follow him and you follow men, then when men fail you, who do you have? You have a tantrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's fascinating to look at the hope that we have, because that's really what we're talking about. Our vision for the future, our hope for the future. As believers, we believe that God is intimately involved in this process. And he has a perfect will and a permissive will and all that stuff that's going on. He's working this out, that history is going somewhere. It has a fulfillment. Mm-hmm. And we're moving towards that fulfillment. There's a destiny out there, a hope, and for now, in this destiny that we're moving towards. And if you don't have that, if all you've got, and I came late to a full understanding of Christ,
right? So
I lived for a while in that there was hope, but it was not eternal hope. Mm-hmm. It was temporal hope. Mm-hmm. It was in what was around me.
Sure.
And so when that is your only hope, then you've got a real problem. And so Christians, we believe that God is changing the world through individual character and life, that he works through individuals, and that as believers we are to go out and our work is to help. We've been transformed by him, and he will transform others, and we're to tell that story. For those that don't have that, all they can do is count on a force greater than them. And as you were saying, if they don't acknowledge God as that force, then what's left is government.
That's right.
And so their hope is in government. It's their existential understanding of the future. And so when you have this massive, unexpected shift, and your expectations, I mean, they had expectations that it was not going to be like this, and then suddenly it's their nightmare.
They're numb.
Has come true.
Yeah.
And now they've gone from that numbness into anger and tantrums, and it's ugly, and they're breaking windows and burning cars, and
But even the ferocity of speech is just...
it's violent. And this is the crowd that has always claimed that they've got the moral high ground on nonviolence and on
inclusiveness,
kindness, and on they hate the haters, is what we're finding out, and their hatred of what they call us to be haters is far exceeds anything we can come up with most of the time. Now we can do some hating, but we have to be so careful how we represent ourselves in this. And
you've seen the diatribes, and certainly on social media, but even the viral video of a woman who was berating her seatmate in a plane and getting kicked off a plane because she just could not stand it. She had no conception of what it meant to be a civil person any longer.
No, it was gone. Right.
And so what is that, though? What is that's infecting this society? I go back to the previous one. Have we become the Babylon that we are as the church now are the remnant that has to look up and find our hope on the hill? Is that? I'm looking for a response here.
Everybody's looking at Ben with blank faces right now. Yeah, I mean, it shouldn't surprise us that. But what's the article say? It shouldn't surprise us that
like
Chaldeans work like Chaldeans, right? I mean, that's kind of the way it is, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's not. None of this it really should not be surprising to anybody who's read the Bible with an eye toward what we're headed for.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on timing. I'm sure there are people that are and that can do it chapter and verse. But the bottom line is we are certainly moving toward something that is going to leave a remnant behind. And we understand that the remnant, the ones who endure to the end, are the ones who eventually get the reward. And I'm going to hang on.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? This has happened before, and that where mankind came together, and we're going to build a tower higher than God,
right?
And they were going to, we can do this. Yes, we can. And and God had to stop it because it was going the wrong way.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And welcome back to Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegy and Bishop Doc Loomis. I want to take a look at now that with the Trump administration in place and starting to sign a lot of executive orders, one of the ones is one that has been done by Republican administrations in the past. It's about abortion, foreign aid, and foreign aid rules. And this is from The Atlantic. And it says Trump strikes at abortion with a revived foreign aid rule. On Monday, just days after hundreds of thousands of women marched on Washington, as well as in hundreds of cities around the nation and the world, to call for, among other things, the protection of women's reproductive rights, President Donald Trump signed off on the first anti-abortion policy of his term. It was expected. Almost immediately upon entering office, every new administration since 1984 has repealed or reinstated, according to its party's position on abortion rights, a rule that prohibits foreign organizations that receive U.S. family planning funds from providing counseling or referrals for abortion or advocating for access to abortion services in the country. It's known as the Mexico City policy, without going into why it's called that. Robert, you work a lot in this field. Is this I would imagine you appreciate President Trump doing this right away.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Does this have any far-reaching, lasting effects?
Well, it has some immediate effects. Let's put it that way. And so what we're gonna see is, having worked in missions, international missions, it's fascinating when we go into the villages in areas. And of course, Mercy Ships is a medical mission. I mean, we do medical stuff, and so we would send in medical teams, dental teams, water and sanitation teams, all kinds of stuff into the villages that we would work in. And you'd go into these and you'd go to where the community, most of the communities of 1,000 or more, would have a little clinic. And you'd go into the clinic area and you would see these old rusty bed frames with just no mattresses, springs exposed, and just nothing. They really had nothing. And then they would show you this because they're looking for aid. They're looking for assistance. They'd show you this stuff. And then as we would walk around the area, you'd see this building off over to the side. And it was freshly painted, had a new zinc roof on it. And you'd go in, it was locked up, it had windows, and it had a sign painted across the front, and it was where they did abortions. And they were funded through foreign aid, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, health organizations that would come in, and they would give them money. And you'd go in, and there'd be this nice little bed in there with everything, and the stirrups and the whole thing, and that's where they did their abortions. And what many people don't know about Planned Parenthood is the origins of Planned Parenthood, because Planned Parenthood has an international operation. It's not just in America. It's been adopted by the UN as their mechanism for getting abortions all over the world. And the idea is to cut down on the poor populations and the those that should not have, that are a problem. They don't need to reproduce. And I'll never forget,
it was eugenics.
Yeah, it's eugenics, and eugenics is that you can engineer genetically better people. That's what that comes from. And it was fascinating. I had a conversation one time with someone that found out I was a missionary in Africa, and we were actually riding a ferry in Sweden, and they said, "Well, do you do family planning?" And I said, "Well, we talked to them about that, but mainly it's maternal health, it's prenatal consultations and how to protect the baby and all that kind of stuff." And they said, "Well, do you tell them about abortions?" And I said, "Well, no, we don't." And he just couldn't believe, this couple actually, that we didn't tell them about abortions, because the world sees the problem as too many children. But in developing world countries, the only way you have a future is by having children.
Right.
So the more children you have, if the poorer you are, the more children you're going to have. And particularly if there's a problem with health, and there usually is, because infant mortality rates are incredibly high, and so they have a lot of kids, hoping that there'll be 1 or 2 or 3 that'll survive until they're old and can take care of them. It's kind of their safety net. They don't have Social Security. They don't have retirement. They don't have any of those things. And so the family provides the safety net generationally.
Has been for
That's the way it
generations.
works. And what you find is as the economic status, I guess you could say, improves in a country, the best way to reduce the population is to improve the economic status. Because as people have more security in their lives, then that one of the motivators is reduced to have a lot of children. And so you actually find that birth rates actually fall as the countries prosper, as they move into more affluence. And so, that's the problem. That's the root of the problem. People think that people are the problem. People are not the problem. Children are not the problem. Children are a gift from God, and that we are to protect them and nurture and cherish them so that they can become productive people.
Well, and there's also, when you combine that, though, in developing countries that also add in the large safety nets, that add in the more safety nets, you reach a tipping point where you go in reverse.
Correct.
And
Japan's classic example.
And then you start to have you don't have the workforce, and you got to bring people in. So it is it has, as you said, the economic idea of having children to help provide that safety net has been going back since mankind. And then now when we inject, though, the governmental side of that, it ends up having a negative effect.
It becomes an ideology, and it really shouldn't be driven by our foreign policy. Shouldn't be driven by that kind of ideology. Our foreign policy should be. We need to help create safety nets and other, reasonable. Not that as some have said,
good practices.
When the safety net becomes a hammock, you have a problem. And so there's a balance in there. So how do you do it? Do you give them a hand out or do you give them a hand up? And so, the whole idea is that our foreign policy should always be a hand up. It should never be a handout.
You've been observing this. What do you think there, Doc?
I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing that a man can sit at a desk, pick up a nice pen, and with bold strokes sign a document and know that as he's signing it, children are going to stop dying. Mm-hmm. I think the power in that. I think people miss that. Mm-hmm. We talked, this article talks about the Mexico City rule as if it's just kind of a political potato. We pass it back and forth. If a Republican comes in, it gets nixed. If a Democrat comes in, it gets reinstated. But I was watching.
Other way around, but yes.
What's that?
Other way around, but we got the idea.
Well, however it works. Yeah. So I'm watching Donald Trump sit at the desk signing this thing and realizing that all over the world, money's going to stop flowing, and some kid who was going to die is now going to live. I just find that absolutely remarkable, and I find it refreshing.
And as you said, though, but it needs to go hand in hand with the policy of making sure that they live and live well.
Correct, and that I think that's from the Trump administration position, and I would say conservative positions. Some would question whether he's a conservative or not, but I think his decisions are pretty conservative right now. So, but anyway. The rising tide floats all boats kind of theory, is that it's the trickle down, that if you get the economy moving, you get in jobs, that everything has a tendency to improve.
Well, Trump's got to do both sides. He's got to take the money away from death and put the money into life. And that's the bottom line. He's got to help people. He's got to do the hand up too. Otherwise, the whole thing doesn't work. You can't just do one or the other.
That's exactly right. And also that the nonprofits have other sources for income. We're only talking about federal sources right now. Mm-hmm. So they have many other income streams coming in. And you think about an organization like Planned Parenthood. They have hugely underwritten. It's just incredible how much money they bring in. And so for the government to be using taxpayers' money to pay for abortions here and around the world is not a good stewardship of the taxpayers' funds. And so that's really at the heart of this as well.
But it does need to be replaced with that knowledge, as you said, as you were doing in mission work, to reach out so that people have better prenatal and postnatal health, that they are bringing their children up in an environment where they might survive.
Exactly.
So those are things that even in this country we have to make sure that as we reverse that trend towards abortion as an elective choice there, and that would make sure that we are providing the other side of that as well too.
Well, there's a physical, economic side of this, and there's also a spiritual side of this, and that's why I think the two hands of the gospel is so important. That you go in with the practical means to be able to help people in their lives, but you've got to bring the spiritual in, so that they can be set free from some of the old ways of doing things, because many people are just held captive by these things. And so Christianity, Christian community development really is what we're talking about.
And we're going to talk about that more in our next segment too, here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And welcome back to Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornigan and Bishop Doc Loomis. I want to look at one more article today. This is also from The Atlantic. It's called Americans at Work, a Church for the Unemployed. And I think it brings up some interesting themes for us. It's this week, our Americans at Work photo essay features photographs from the Northwest Bible Church's Between Jobs Ministry in Spring, Texas, made by photographer Elizabeth Conley. While the nation has been enjoying the benefits of cheaper gas at the pump, oil-producing states have seen the negative effects. The latest numbers from the U.S. Energy Information Administration show that between October of 2014 and May of 2016, there's been a decline in oil and gas employment of 26%. So this church has for 25 years been hosting a Between Jobs ministry, and people from all walks of life, and now they're seeing also more white-collar workers are showing up with coat and tie on and resumes in hand, and also talking about how to search for a job. Now, it's a photo essay, and it goes through various things like talking about how this is your job, is looking for a job. But the church, though, is taking an interesting tact here, in that they have this ongoing ministry that also begins with devotionals and prayers, and talks about the sacred job of putting people into productive work. We've talked for years about how, and we've talked on this program about healthcare, and how the Catholic Church had long led the way in providing health care and taking that on as a ministry. Robert, what about this side, though, the economic side?
Yeah, that's kind of a segue from our last segment when we were talking about Christian community development. Mm-hmm. What is Christian and is that just a foreign missions concept that we go do overseas somewhere? Or is that something we do right here in our communities?
Is it just building a ramp for somebody, or is it helping them find a job?
That's exactly right. And there are lots of different ways this realizes itself, you know, and this program. And it's interesting looking at it, because I've seen a number of these programs. They typically will begin with an outreach to someone. They've had a circumstance in their church where, and particularly in that area, in the Houston area, Texas area, where it's boom and bust cycles one after another.
Right.
And so, it's like you said, sometimes we have just a handful when the good days, when it's booming, and then when it's busted, we'll have
300 people.
Yeah, exactly. And, but, the genesis of this will be trying to help someone in the church or a friend of someone in the church. It kind of grows from that. And then it expands, because this program is not just offered to the church congregation. Right. It's to the community. Anybody can come up. And so they see this as both an internal and an external, the one another's that we do, as well as the benevolence part of it that we reach out. And so it's really exciting. We're having our men's retreat in a few weeks, and we're doing a program called Grow Together. And it's along the same line that we're looking at ways that we can impact not only among ourselves, among the members of the church, but also in the community, and make a difference on these really practical steps. Learn how to write a resume, learn how to dress when you do an interview, the 10 things you don't say when you're doing an interview, or
right.
That kind of thing, and real practical assistance, but linked with the spiritual side of it as well.
Doc is over there thinking of the 10 things.
I am. Yeah. A guy at the Christian church down the road wrote this resume for me. Yeah. Oh, he did he?
But Doc, this is we talk, and unfortunately sometimes only talk as Christians about reaching out and helping other people, and we think if we toss some money in the plate, then we've done that. We've done that job, and we'll go have donuts and coffee afterwards, and we're all okay. But here's a church, and they're not the only ones, but they're founding another way, another mission in their life. And their church life.
All of my donors that support our ministry, you want to plug your ears right now, and I say this, but Ben's right. I mean, it really is. I mean, things have to be funded, don't they? Mm-hmm. Whether it's the bad funding for Planned Parenthood or it's the good funding of Spirit for Mission Incorporated, a 501c3 conveniently located in Morehead City. Things have to be funded, and so money in the plate is important. But it's really, our job in the church is to encourage people to live a Christian life worthy of our Master, to be yoked with Him in all the things that we do. And that actually means going out and teaching job skills and working with addicts and fighting for the rights of the unborn and helping young women who are pregnant and their fathers. All that is a part of the Christian walk. So to simply limit ourselves to placing money in a tray, that probably is not the whole answer. This story, now I want to say that's the good thing about this. I love what they're doing. And I've known churches, and you probably have too, that do something very similar. The church I came from, St. Luke's Church, had a very similar program where people came in, wrote their resumes, got good counseling and everything. But the challenge that we have to be really careful of is because this is a slide. What's it called? It's a photo essay. Mm-hmm. Okay, if our viewers, our listeners can't see the photos we're looking at, but one of the photos, if you guys noticed, was at the end. There was a man speaking in a room, I think, and there was a large screen. I'm trying to recall it, and on the screen were the words, "God wants you to succeed." Did you see that?
Mm-hmm.
It's very Andrew Womack.
You were designed by God to succeed.
Right.
That's what it says.
And this is where the challenge comes, because we want to see the church bring a Christian perspective into our work, that we want to encourage people to go into the marketplace and work, not just because that's how you live, but because it's where we can minister. But what happens oftentimes in these ministries, and we have to be very careful of, is that we don't start selling this kind of word and faith mentality or theology, this idea that somehow because we're created in God's image, that His intention is that we all be millionaires, that we all be hugely successful, that we never have illness, because this simply is not God's reality.
In other words, the definition of success.
Correct.
That's precisely what I'm
different.
getting at.
Yeah.
And so if you take this ministry and you base it completely on the fact that success is measured in the job you have and therefore the income you receive, I'm not saying these people are doing this. I'm sure they're doing it just right. But there have been churches who have preached that word and faith theology.
Name it and claim it.
Name it and claim it. And so then folks...
the prosperity ministries.
Yes.
It is a prosperity ministry, and I think we have more to offer than that. And I think, let me say this last thing is that, because I know you're just about to ask me, then, Doc, how do you measure success? I think that God's idea of success is how successfully we glorify Him.
Exactly.
So in whatever we do, it's not how well we do it. It is how well what we do glorifies Him. And if that's at the center of this, I love it.
You know, I did mention the one another's, and I think that's probably the key, isn't it? The success is how well we do the one another's, and that's within the church and outside the church. And Jesus said it real plainly that they will know that you are mine by the way you treat one another. So it really isn't our bank accounts or our education or our appearances or our pedigrees, our genealogies. It's none of that stuff that is the sign that we are his.
So if the church does something to help somebody get a job, then the goal in discipleship is to help that person who got the job do something to
With it.
somebody else.
With it.
Correct.
But if it stops, if it's
Yes.
static,
To
if
pass
it's
it
the
on.
church's job is to do this and you're to receive this, then we've really fallen short of success.
Well,
and that's
it's
one of the things that it said in the article, that many of them come back.
right.
That have gone through this program and that they
And they
become
work with
counselors.
others, yes.
Yeah.
And they're involved in it and they are passing it on. And it goes back to that thing, to comfort others with the comfort with which we have been comforted.
It's the last part of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's what we study. You know, when you get done, now you go out and serve others.
Right.
This wasn't a gift that you received.
For you, just you.
Yes.
Well, let's go back to our first segment. As you had said, Doc, there too, we are a part of our prayer is not only that God's will be done in the election of Donald Trump, but also in the service that he provides, that God will still be working through him. And so that's what we look for here is if this church helps somebody get a job, if maybe a church is helping someone recover or sit with them while they're ill, they're helping them to make appointments and make runs, that there's not going to stop just because they're able to provide that hour of volunteer service. It's going to be an ongoing relationship. An ongoing relationship the church has with the community.
That's
Back to what
exactly
you were
right.
saying.
And some will develop that way and some won't. I mean, that's just in relationships. That's just the way it is. But the intention is that you have a program that by the time they get to the end of it, they know what true success is. At least they've heard that.
Right.
Now, whether they follow that or not, or believe that or not, is up to them and the Holy Spirit and what He's doing. But you have presented the truth to them, and that's all we can do. Really, we can't guarantee success. All we can do is say, here is how God works.
Their true prosperity is in how that success is manifested in their love.
That's right.
And their love for God and their love for their neighbor.
Yeah.
We'll have more next week on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.